nobody has a question. We'll go through a couple of things today. Typically, within AT&T, there's not a guy that turns on the 5G switch and we go home and it's all done, right? We did do that with 3G first part of this year. It was excruciating. So we turned down all of our 3G coverage network as we move forward. So think about 3G, 4G, LTE, 5G, whatever you have. So you're going to see the other carriers, again, turning down their networks. You're going to see funny things happen. My CPAP doesn't give me my dashboard anymore. I guess they had a 3G sim on AT&T, I don't know. So you'll see stuff not work. My alarm, same thing. 3G sim on another carrier. So we're seeing 3G come down, AT&T's down. You'll see Verizon and T-Mobile pull those down within the next year, year and a half. Good to know. We get called all the time. It doesn't work. Well, there's no power. So let's move into the 5G transformation. I didn't bring up the slide, but this is completely commercial now. So post 9/11 commission, close to the anniversary of that, the federal government got together and said, this is really weird that our municipality public safety agencies can't talk to each other. They're on different radio spectrum, they're on different platforms, and these mass events, it's hard to coordinate. So they took, and our federal government's infinite wisdom, 15 years to figure out what they wanted to do about it. And they came out of that commission and said, we want to have a dedicated network for public safety, period. That's theirs to use, it's theirs. They can figure out how they want to build it and use it. And so in the commercial world, they issue a request for proposal, AT&T responded. Some other carriers chose not to. And we were awarded a 25-year, $25 billion contract to build FirstNet. So FirstNet is the official government public safety network. We see our competitors trying to massage the name a little bit, but the FirstNet Authority controls the network. We build, operate, and maintain it for them, but they tell us what they want to do. So we allowed all 50 states to decide if they want to opt in or not. All 50 did. Imagine that. We want everybody to be on the same network. Okay, we'll opt in. But we were going to do some things specifically here in Utah. We were just talking for a minute about like Echo Canyon, right? Like before that, I was driving up the road with one of our VPs to a customer meeting 5 years after I came back to AT&T this time. And he's like, "What do you have?" I'm like, "Another carrier." He's like, "Well, don't you miss talks and data and talk?" I'm like, "Never had it, never missed it, right?" And then all of a sudden I got to the cabin, and one day my work phone worked better than my personal phone, and voila, I'm now an AT&T customer. So we talk about coverage. Coverage is king, right? And so the FirstNet Authority allows us to build additional network, if you will. And with that additional network, we negotiated the ability to utilize that network spectrum if the public safety agencies aren't doing it. And as I've told a lot of people, if grandma's house is burning, I really don't need to know what the score of the game is, right? So it's really kind of a phenomenal thing because we've been able to really hockey stick our coverage based on feedback from the governor's office. But that underpins a lot of how we've been able to hyper-grow our 5G rollout. And I talked hour-ish, sorry. I can get going.
Yeah, we were at one, so you can
okay.
at one.
I was on a call last week on my team. My boss said, if you could quickly talk about this, and I made a joke that, hey, if I go long, you can give me extra quota. You absolutely get extra quota. But it's kind of an interesting deal where we look at how do we grow coverage. Coverage is really key. So this is our way of building out 5G. Now, let's make you a little bit smarter about it. So when you hear about 5G, we talk about mass IoT connectivity. That's really where I live. I live specifically in IoT. Like literally, that's where I live. And I strictly live in, I cover 16 states for public sector, state and local education, across the mid-country. When we do a team map, it's like, there's Brad. So large geography, little population. But we talked about a couple of things that happen with regards. When we talk massive IoT, we're talking billions, right? Billions of devices. We're talking about ultra low latency, right? We want to have super fast. If I'm driving down the road in my whatever car and somebody stops and a kid walks across the street in front of me, needs to be quick. So we're talking ultra low latency, that's speed. Reliable, same thing. Last thing I want to do, we're working right across the street, chasing this ball. Didn't happen that time, sorry. Now you got a problem. So reliable, better throughput. So I always make a comment that it doesn't matter if it's a 50-lane wide freeway, right? If there's a snowstorm and the 80-car pileup, you're still not getting through. So we want to scoot the throughput through. So that's the first thing is they can kick you off when they get a first class ticket. Again, I'm totally cool with that if you're good. Ultra high speeds. So this is where it gets kind of interesting because we talk about going from 100 meg to 10 gig. On one end, we talk about the responsiveness coming through there, but there's really three flavors of. Did we get? I think we're right where we want to. First net, 94G, 5G, 5G plus. I guess I should have really tell. Let's go here. Okay, and I'll do a shameless plug to Sierra Wireless because they seem to have put a couple of slides together that. To me, it was the offering. So what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about the three flavors of 5G, what we call high band, right? So 5G, super fast, great coverage, a little bit smaller, right? So small cell, super fast. If you go to what we call low band, slow, it goes everywhere, right? So I'm lost in the mountains, they can find me, but I'm not very fast. So if you look at Apple's thing, 10-character text, I'm in trouble, right, with their latest release. That's partially why it goes up through satellite, so it's not completely here. And then mid-band, we get, this is what we call Goldilocks mode. So we get good speeds, we get good coverage. So depending on what you're doing, these 5G rollouts are one of these three flavors. So you're deploying mid-band, you're deploying high band, and you're deploying low band. So when we want to cover, southern Utah, we do low band. When we want to cover University of Utah football game with, a BYU football game where they win. 50,000 people want to tweet out, they want to take a picture, they want to smile at the play, they want whatever. That's where our mid-band or the low band takes care, because what ends up happening is very small cell. When I was talking with the manufacturers, small cell really means small cell, like hundreds of feet, right? So if that projector was a small cell antenna, 300 feet, and then you're off that high capacity network that has all of that throughput. So you'll put 100 of those in a stadium, and then you have to come back in. Let's see here, I thought they had, we'll kind of move through this because I kind of shared. Right here. Let's see if we can find. Yeah, so, kind of this Goldilocks zone right here is what I was talking about. I'm going to switch presentations real quick, and we'll talk about what we're here for today. Okay, here we go. Internet of Things, connected devices, data to data, machine to machine. Call it what you will. It's me not talking to you on voice call, right? It's that simple. When I start my presentation, I'm like, what is not Internet of Things? It's not you and me talking. I'm not able to dial a phone number, and that's really our difference, is we don't have 10-digit dialing between data devices, right? But we actually do what we call an MSISDN, same 10 characters, just a made-up dialing plan. So, here it is. Which one do you want to talk about? Some of the really cool ones, EV charging stations. we're starting to get into that where it's not just, hey, I put some power into a charging station, show up and plug in. Now we can talk about peak time usage, rapid charge. What if I show up with 3/4 of a tank or charge? What if I show up with a quarter charge? You know, we can do some smart, what if the power's out and I can't get charged, right? And I'm at the end of the road. So we're seeing some really interesting stuff with electric vehicle, shake machines. Let's make machine. I was thinking earthquake sensors, but shake machines is actually making shakes, I guess. So, meters, you see a lot of that. I'm kind of old. I remember the guy coming around with cracker my water. Play, read my meter, right? Or got to read the power meter. There's two options now typically for meter reading. They'll build a radio network or utilize the cellular network, sprinklers. I have my sprinklers on. The city keeps shutting them off for rain related, and it never rains in my place. I feel better about it. Gunshot sensors. We will talk about that. We're seeing the ability to what I call bolt-on devices to street lights. And the street light use case is pretty simple, right? If the light's on during the day and it shouldn't be, that's a problem. If the light's off during the night and it should be, that's a problem. So pretty much any of us can figure out if somebody could use help with their street lights. Let's see here. GPS, we've seen that forever. How do you driving safe, driving crazy, are you lost? Dog collar, I should really use that a couple years ago. My dog ran away, I went out to find him, I was looking for him, I rolled my ankle on a sidewalk I had, it's on like a 15-foot drop. And so I took the rocks. I talked about that because we were playing golf the other day, so that's reminding me it was still there. Interesting, IoT momentum. AT&T, we normally report to Wall Street, what we call net adds, if you will. That's how many we added in the top of the bucket minus how many we lost on the bottom, right? So really the cell phone industry in a voice world is somewhat cannibalistic, right? We choose some of them, they choose some of ours, we just arm wrestle. And so AT&T, don't quote me on this, but I think the number was 4.5 million net adds, so we were growing, but 4.5 million. I mean, we're a big company, so that's actually not as amazing as, you know, if Bob and I had a telecom shop and we had 4.5 million phones, we'd be feeling pretty good. But what's interesting is in the first half of 2021, we added 85 million IoT connected devices. So we're way outpacing our competitors. And I just boggled my mind. Why are we using the 4.5 million number? Use the 85 million. We are, you know, we're just going crazy with that. This is really why. You know, 32 plus global brands and Comstar and whatever else. It's probably on our network. Let's see here. Complete range of connectivity. We kind of talked about, when we talked about 5G MEC, I wanted to talk about that just for a second because 5G MEC is that small broadband. There's a public safety or a public spectrum available to do that. We mentioned the University of Utah's Advanced Wireless Group. They're using a spectrum called CBRS, which is an open band spectrum to develop use cases and those types of things. So what we see is we're going to be able to connect those, let's say University of Utah campus and then some other campus. Well, when you go between those, they're not built out, so we'll provide that bridge, if you will, between those two networks. Great way to develop use cases, great way to develop products. Some organizations have had some challenges getting those operational on traditional networks. And we're kind of cranky about how we bring devices on our network. I talk to guys all the time, they're like, I ordered a chipset from that country way across the sea, and I built a widget box, and I threw on some open source code. When I hang on your network, I'm like, no, that's not how it works. And they're like, but it's fine. And I'm like, well, we don't know how it's going to perform to our network. But more importantly, you don't want to get 1,000 of these devices out there, which happens regularly, and then realize they don't work. Right? Now I've got 1,000 devices, they're in the field, they're not performing correctly. That doesn't work. So we have a foundry. We have a list of chipsets that are already approved, devices that are already approved, cellular modems that are already approved. And then you can bolt on your application device or meter or whatever on top of those, which allows you to, I would say, It's a reasonable speed to market, but it's a reliable speed to market. And sometimes in the IT world, we talk about what's good enough, and sometimes it is good enough, right? Sometimes it's good enough to have to go, Joe, shake the lock and see that the gate's still locked. Other times it's a nuclear facility or an NSA facility where it's like, I don't want anybody within 10 feet of that lock, so I'm gonna put a video camera on it, I'm gonna charge up the ground and see if anybody's locked in there. And it's a question of what's good enough. Let's see here. Let's bump through to, yeah, I mean, this is kind of an eye chart. Some of these are eye charts. I'm not a real fan of. We get to, oh, there we go. Wait until we got to the 35 slides of what we do. Shipping was really interesting. Shipping companies came to us and said, we need a sensor. We need like, I don't know, it was 30 milliwatts. Put a solar panel on it, put a little propeller on it for wind. Did like 130 milliwatts. So they're all concentrated right off the coast of San Diego, right? It's a big red dot with a million things in there because of the supply chain issues. We know right where they are, we just can't get the stuff off the ship. Building technology, this we see, you know, in a real common existence when you talk about smart cities, right? Fleet, traffic management, video intelligence, we'll talk about that in a minute. Asset management. I love the oil fields. What do those trailers cost you? I don't know, $80,000 trailer. For the, where'd you park it, Bob? I don't know. Really? I don't know. That was like 2 months ago. I can't remember what that I was at. Well, that's a problem. Literally, year and a half later, some guy goes, oh, that's where he parked it. It's been missing for a year and a half. So we got a lot of that request from, out in Berlin when the oil price per barrel goes up to justify pulling that waxing crude out. We get a lot of calls there, but it's amazing how people lose $100,000 pieces of equipment. It's completely bonkers. I had to smile. I mean, one quick story about that. It's kind of funny. Had a family in our neighborhood who asked us to help move, if you know what I'm talking about. And so it went on for like a month. And I'm like, all right, everybody's done this like 3 weeks in a row. I'll go do it. So I'm over there. I always drag my kids because I really just supervise. And so we finish up, and it was probably 4 days later. My son was pretty good friends with the police there. And all of a sudden, 2 police cars were sitting on the corner there. Like, what the heck's going on? Like, well, we're waiting for the warrant. Like, what? Well, they happened to steal the piece of equipment that had a GPS tracker on it, and we know it's in there. So really what we were doing is providing fencing services, right? You bring it in, and we load it up and ship it out. Very strange deal. But the GPS, all of a sudden we found that device, and big old generator, power saw. It's the one that they didn't hang from the crane. They drove off without hanging it. So asset management is super interesting. Connected car, we talked about what that means, and you're talking about hundreds of millions of calculations a second. So that ultra availability of network. Let's see here. Pulled up the wrong. All right. So rather than going looking for it, I had a 37-page slide that talked about each one of these. So is there any use case that you guys are curious about? I want to develop the smart cow, because if I could put a tag on every cow and do it properly, I'd be doing pretty well. We're seeing methane analysis, more from cows than from mines. How can I capture methane? Go ahead.
We're interested in water, tracking water usage.
Yeah.
Inbound and then also outbound.
Right. Yeah, I go to the doctor all the time to do this stuff. So we're seeing a huge issue on that, especially here in the West where we get dry. I've done probably 4 water companies this year with connected devices. That's one of the ones where it's like, we're kind of out in the middle where with our pump station, but we want to know if something's happening there, some issues are going on. I lived in Sandy and their epic fell of the former mayor Bradford. I was really comfortable with having water issues. To me, that's kind of table stakes of what public does, right? It's like, you should give me good water, you should provide some emergency services, and I should be able to drive on the road, and those types of things are kind of essential services. So, what do we see in water? We see flood sensors. It's really a question of, I was presenting to the CIOs in Arizona, and it was kind of funny, because I'm usually like this, it's a pretty casual conversation. They're like, oh, that's interesting, you take away a couple of nuggets. I did that, hey, do you have any questions? And they're like, we can buy sensors, but we can't figure out how to use them. And I'm like, well, that's too bad. And the guy goes, yeah, what are we supposed to do? Because you can have these sensors, but how do you remediate that information back in, right? Because you can't, I work for a company that's funny, all customers are not created equal, and you can't improve what you can't measure, right? So the question comes is, you're exactly right, inflow, outflow, quality, usage on the back end. There are typically sensors for all of that, but the challenge is really bringing that into a dashboard. And that's why I kind of make that comment. Great, I had 75 acre-feet of water in my system, right? Now I know that I have 75 acre-feet of water in my system. What do I do with that? If you're Lake Powell, you go, oh, I should about 160,000 acre-feet, right? I go out more than I come in, and I lower the water. So, is there a specific use case around water besides flow that you're asking about?
We just want to be able to track it closely. Yeah.
Track it.
So even the person in their home can see how much they used that day.
Well, I've been, it's kind of funny because I moved into a new house. I'm like, I'm just going to make everything green last year, right? I wanted like 3 hours a day every station, like a day. I'm like, I kind of feel bad about that this year. So I kind of dialed it in. I talked about my locally manufactured timer. I'm totally cool with the rain delay, just let give the moisture to the top. So I probably should have a slight sensor. But I will tell you that I would love a real-time meter. I know they have the meter out there. The problem is probably, I don't know for sure, but they're probably using the radio network. With the radio network, those pucks have a short life, right?
Right.
So it's like, how often do I ping it?
Right.
Is that the right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
That is the problem, right? And so that is the challenge, right? Is okay. So how can I monitor that? Well, I used to do alarms. I mean, we had flow valves all the time. But, it's amazing when the sprinklers go off. A lot of the damage isn't from the fire; it's from the sprinkler going off for 5 hours and being in a 25-degree environment where they freeze and then everything goes to heck. It's like, yeah, whatever you can do, put out your own fire. Don't invite the fire department over, right? Because they're just going to flood your house. It's not going to be a fireplace. It'll be a floodplain. But it would be very interesting for me. I would love it, but that's not our question. And so to me, an answer would probably be, if an individual homeowner wants to do it, would be to install whatever you want to call it, a smart flow meter, probably after the public connection, but as I'm thinking about it, where do I use most of my water? It's irrigation, so I want to be before my stuff and waste out, yeah.
Is what I was thinking.
Oh, you're thinking agriculture?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, huge use cases there.
Right.
Huge use cases. A lot of companies in Idaho are doing the pivots, the soil moisture, the laser leveling.
Right.
When you talk agriculture, yeah, that's a big deal. A lot of use cases around that. And then,
You're on radios though, because you're in an area where there's not very good service.
right.
You're kind of tight.
So that goes back to, we have what we call in the industry low power wireless,
Right.
or super low power, so it gets anything.
All the time.
Yeah, we can send some data. And I guess the question would be is, do you want, this is always the question that asks for, so you tell me, do you want to just have somebody see that, okay, you used 100 gallons, 100 gallons, 100 gallons, or do you want to look for variance, right?
Very.
Also, I went to
Yeah.
500, also I went to,
Yeah.
yeah. I do that with accounting. One of my favorite stories ever, because it wasn't me, was people know that Salt Lake City built a new Department of Justice building or whatever, right? So back in the day, what does that take? 3-4 years to build a building when they demo the old one? There was a telecom company who's a major carrier here who billed them for that service that entire time. Nobody realized. And what did accounting say? 10,000 in, 10,000 out. 10,000 in, 10,000 out for like 14 months. And all of a sudden somebody goes, why are we paying for the building that stopped existing 10 years ago? So there's two theories behind that. One is you gotta make sure your baseline's correct and check for changes.
Right.
Because that's what accounting always does with normally, I got a bill right now, I'm trying to figure out where 10 cents came from. Because they're a municipality, and they're like, we're not okay with a 10-cent variance, I can't pay that. I'll take a day of my life to figure it out, because I get that, and then in 2 years, you're gonna have a big balance, we're gonna throw you to collections. But, so from a standpoint, I guess my question would be, can you develop a reliable baseline? Because then if you look at anomalies, now you've got the ability to use less power out of that battery. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're able to, and we do that within our automated platform. That's really what I sell is a data sim management platform. Actually, I don't sell, we give it away because it allows people to self-service. We have a major auto manufacturer, probably 30,000 cars out there. The connectivity is managed by two people. So platform that we've underpinned this with is, I just love it. And then I give it away, so it's a pretty easy job for me. If I can't give it away, what have I done? So why couldn't I give it away? Because we didn't have coverage, right? It doesn't do me any good to have a cool machine if I can't use it. So now that I have coverage, we're out of time. So my understanding would be probably baseline, and then determine what your variance is. And that would be probably taking a lot of factors, you know, what's the current weather, wind.
What, how many shares do we get pulled back?
Yeah.
So,
And by the way, I mean, in that world, if you're not drilling your own wells, you're starting to talk about this ebb towards metering of,
right, the co-op deal.
yeah. See that all with power too, same kind of thing. Got that power. Let's figure it out. Let's solve it and go live in wherever we want to live. We could have 2 houses, each house, that house. Because that's a huge deal. I mean, what's the federal government driving on? If, you know, global warming, whatever your opinion is on that. Or,
Here's the deal, okay, that's because they get the water.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you
They
know,
don't-
cash clunkers or whatever that was.
Yeah.
There's a big mine capping project. We're seeing the methane part of that. We're seeing, what was the other one? This whole digital divide, I didn't want to bring that up. I don't even have a clock. Are we 1:30 already or not? So I put my phone in the bag so I wouldn't keep looking at it because I keep getting texts about somebody somewhere has a problem in their network, I promise. It's, you know, they don't always work forever. And when they don't work, you never call me and tell me it's working. When was the last time you called your cellular friend? Dude, you guys are awesome today. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Never hear from you. And so it's really funny because for my job, the quieter it is, the better it is, right? When I get a call like last week, it's like the whole city's down and it's on fire. And it's the fire department that's down. So, yeah, it was a bad day. So continue with that use case. Okay, so you got the pivots. They paid you to put in the pivots?
Well, they can do a portion.
Of course, it's subsidized. Sure,
Yeah,
upgrade.
we're saving water.
Yeah, instead of pure irrigation, just flowing it in.
Right.
So you got the pivots now.
But the water shares comes from the co-op.
Correct.
So when it gets to the point where we have back down 5 shares, 3 shares and stuff, I was like, because right now I run my pivot from my house, and I just tell it what to do, but sometimes that radio is down, so I have to go way out there.
Yep. Right. Brad's first discussion today was coverage. That's why.
That and regulating it, making sure that I'm going back on my shares when I'm supposed to, and
Yeah, I mean, that's a great use case. Great use case. And by the way, if the technology's not there, it'll probably be there in a year or two at the most. Because what we're seeing, I'll give you an example. San Jose City wanted to do a smart lighting project, right? We want smart lights. I don't know why. They said we want smart lights. They said that in 2017. 2017. We want to do smart lights. At the end of this year, first part of next, they'll finally be able to roll out their first, I think it was like 87,000 stoplights. Enough to get some guy all excited about his quota. You know, they want 500, I'm doing 87,000, but I didn't sell anything for 5 years. Probably don't have a job, and the guy following me doesn't have a job either. You know, we always wait for these bigger, better deals, but by the end of this year, first part of next year, they'll do some lighting. I was going to talk about bolt-ons where gunshot sensor, motion sensor, LiDAR with some questions of is it bike, pedestrian, or automobile, coming through the intersections, what's the count, how do we optimize that, some of those types of things. Wi-Fi, this digital divide, I think that's where I'm going to. digital divide, right, really became obvious beginning of COVID, right? Okay, go work at home, less privileged, and underserved become more marginalized because they, the only place, and tragically, I have a problem with this, but the only place they got a good meal and an education was in the school system, right? So I don't feel good about it. Sorry. I don't feel good in America that it keeps us in that period. So then they go to the digital divide, and we're like, this whole area doesn't have internet service, but they're supposed to go to distance learning.
Right.
What do we do? And speaking got very creative. Hand them a hotspot, 30, 50, 100,000 hotspots. Well, what do you find? Kids like, let's go, And all of a sudden somebody uses 2 gig, these guys are watching YouTube.
Right.
They're going up to 30, 40, 50 gig. Our network was already stranded in these rural areas. And then, oh yeah, we probably don't want them going to sites that are inappropriate. So now we need to put on the Child Information Protection Safety Act where we provide filtering, and then, why not use Dropbox? It's free. I shouldn't use the name, but it's free. Well, it's free because now I can put whatever I want, wherever I want, and share it with whoever I want. And sometimes that's not the right thing to share. So all of a sudden this idea of, hey, let's throw out hotspots and go get them, became a little bit of a challenge. And so this goes back to my sensor, my hotspot. You gotta put some wrappers around that to, manage what you find, to grab the data points, to manage it, monitor it, use it, and to interpolate that data back into something that's useful. And your example is exactly that. I need to know where I'm at on my shares. Period. Right? Isn't that totally what you're asking?
Yeah, it is.
Period. Yeah. It's
Well, and to talk about the mining part,
Yeah.
when you're leaching out there, you need to know too what your leach pad is, how much.
Totally get it.
It's hard to get the service unless you're using a radio.
Yeah.
So,
So when you say radio, are they point to points? Like throw an antenna and point them at each other?
yeah, kind of,
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
yeah. We haven't grown up out there yet.
I'm curious, where?
We did that
Okay.
at Battle Mountain.
Oh, I know Round Valley. I actually, a little bit north of there, I did a super cool project with Barrett Mercer Gold Mine. We put a phone system down the bottom. I didn't go down there, that actually had to be a bomb-proof, explosion-proof phone, right? Kind of bad to have a spark go off.
Right.
But what was really cool there is when you talk about water, they had the ponds, the settling ponds, right? Well, they bought all the rubber balls that McDonald's was putting in the play pits, and they put them on top of the water because then the birds weren't getting down into the water. What a brilliant use case, right? Let's go put some rubber or some play balls in there, and now we won't have the birds kind of problem. So people can think of some really interesting solutions to some problems. But so I'm just thinking, I'm really going down this use case. So the pivots, are they on a well? So it's groundwater?
No, it's all irrigation.
All irrigation.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they're not on a well.
Okay.
So
So
we have
and
to
this,
make-
yeah, I hope everybody's kind of enjoying it. This is the process that I go through with a lot of customers, like find a need, fill a need, whatever that is. So if you're coming through irrigation, that's usually determined in acre feet, right?
It is, but
Yeah.
it's up to us
To figure it out.
to turn it down to what shares we are.
Got it.
So they'll put it on the board and they'll say, okay, we're down to 3 shares.
Got it.
And for each venture, we're obligated to turn it down to 3
Yeah.
shares. But when my radio's down, I can't turn that pivot down from the house, and that's, I was just wondering what other option I would have to.
Yeah, you can leave it up, like
Okay.
just talk, which is what I like to do. Right? Literally, this is probably the first time in 3 years that I've put currently in. So yeah, so the use case is define what I need,
Right.
and what you're saying is you've got that standard, but now I've got to change an event because they're changing shares.
Right,
Right.
right. And that uses a lot of battery when we do that.
So do your batteries have solar backup? Okay. They have wind?
Yes.
Okay. So wind, solar, and the battery still
Yeah.
is constructed.
Yeah.
I have better battery manufacturers.
That's
Use Duracell instead of Kirkland, I don't know.
I know.
No, because power is a really interesting question in that environment. That's why we talk about low power, a lot of what we would call SCADA type stuff.
Right.
That's what we're talking about there. So, yeah, it's not.
I was gonna think out of the box.
No, I like, so in your ideal scenario, what would it be?
I don't know. I really don't. We've tried Well, we're trying something different now. We're doing it, instead of point to point, we now have a transmitter that we're throwing off, but we'll see how that works.
Funny, multiple.
Yeah.
Had a conversation with the state just south of us the other day about that. One little area, their service area, couldn't be found by the radios. They're like, what do we do? And I came up with some massively complex solution. Oh, we'll build network here, and we'll backhaul from our RAN, and then we'll make it secure.
Right.
And the guy goes, well, you're just kind of hoping for a cellular router. I'm like, oh, all right, we can do that. Here's the router, here's dual SIMs, we can do dual carriers, and I guess we're done.
Right.
Go buy 8 of them, because that's how many you needed. So, have you ever seen if you have any cell coverage there?
We have none. Zero.
None.
None on the north end of that mountain. It's up on.
Is it because it's shaded?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a conversation with one of my good friends in the state of Utah about that discussion about us. So what we're talking about there is shaded, right? You put a cell tower up, you get great reception over here, you get some fade, it's got an umbrella, so you don't really get it. Super funny story. I was out riding my ATV with my son a couple years ago, and where we were riding, I'm always, because I'm the guy, right? I work for him. Do I have it? Do I not have it? And no cell service whatsoever. None for 5-10 miles anywhere around. And he's like, oh, look at that. That's kind of a cool trail. And so we went up it, and we got to the I've never been, like, not highest peak of the world, whatever. But I was on the top, we were at the very top of this hill, right? You couldn't go up anymore. And I looked at my phone, I'm like, 5 bars of LTE? I could watch a movie up there. So that's what my son wants to do. He wants to take his friends up there. He wants to throw up a projector, throw up a generator, and watch a movie on the top of the mountain. By the way, that's how you get Wi-Fi in airplanes, right? Just when our antenna's up, there you go. Third line of sight. So we used to do a lot of stuff with Curve of the Earth with microwave, right? We talk about that radio. Great questions. I think somehow you got to be able to, again, you can't improve what you can't measure, so somehow you got to find a way to measure that.
Yeah.
And then create some sort of standardization with regards to, what you guys do in those times. And maybe just find the heck out of you if you use it right.
Well,
Suddenly $100,000 a minute, you're pretty motivated to maybe just put a camping chair out there and do it. Am I right? Yeah. What's good enough?
It's
And
kind of what the association said, it depends on how much we're going to get by,
yeah, associations are kind of from that.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of HOAs that.
I don't know if this is applicable or not, but what about a search grid for search and rescue or something of that nature where each of the searchers would have some sort of a pinging device that shows where they've gone specifically so that they, or for people who are hikers or children or whoever, to say, okay, we buy this device, and it can be found just about everywhere. I don't know if that already exists with GPS or not.
Sort of. I mean, again, because I'm too old to walk out if my ATV breaks down. So, a couple of things that are interesting. Garmin Montana actually has a point-to-point, where if you're within 30 to 50 miles, you can actually send messages back. Because my wife's always like, "You've been going for 4 hours." I'm like, 23 minutes. Come on, I'll be back in a little bit. So they actually allow you to do some of that. That's Apple's new thing, is go satellite for GPSing.
Right.
Google Maps was offline. I didn't even realize that they had an offline version where you can download it. Clearly in public safety, we're doing a ton of that, an absolute ton of that with regards to some of our cool devices. I talked to Steve, they're like, hey, I want one of those. Sell on my truck. And one of my peers fires in Oregon. He won an award. It's like, I got to get off the call. The truck's here. I got to drive it to the fire. Sell one, pop it up, and there's the cell tower right on the event site. You see that, events like Burning Man or Speed Week or almost every municipality has one. Balloon Fest. What else? But from a GPS standpoint, so this goes back to, what did I start off with? Coverage, right? This is what I need. Common is there. I used to say available as water, but probably not quite that term anymore, right? So, but that was what I heard about from the internet 25 years ago. Common is there is available as water now.
What about tracing cattle?
There's smart guys out there. I was under an NDA like 5
They
years
don't
ago.
work.
Well, it's a question of what you do.
Really?
Yeah, because, so it goes back to that question of both battery and then what you're looking for.
Right.
And the use case that we were looking for is if they don't move for a day, and that's probably a problem.
Well, I just want to know if they're getting hauled off the mountain.
Yeah, there you
You know
go.
what I mean? Just because, when you're out 17, 10
Yeah.
You're wondering where they went.
Or you find his ear, right?
Grass,
You find
you
the
know,
ear. Okay.
yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. So, you know, for me, it's like, well, then maybe I have a heat sensor that detects the body heat. Maybe that goes back to the low power stuff typically,
Yeah.
because they're typically way out, and so you have to get into that low power world. But I know the use case was if they haven't moved, same thing, geofence. We were talking about a video analytics solution that I'm geeked out right now about two things: the electric vehicle charging, just because, well, a lot of the federal government's going to give a lot of money, so I might as well get some of my taxes back, right? That's the way I feel about it. I'm like, oh look, they're giving me back some money. So I like to be built in video. Video intelligence is becoming really interesting, especially in the Department of Transportation world. And you know, we talk about coverage, but then we also have to talk about, I spent all the time over here, but there was a guy who gave a presentation. He had 2 lecterns, right? And the one lectern was, just throw bandwidth at it, right? Much bandwidth, so that's what we see in the new world. Word is SD-WAN, by big dirty dumb pipes, and you'll eventually get your data through. And then the other lectern was, well, let's manage that data, right? We look at data, capacity is a finite issue, let's be good users of that. This is kind of the comment, right? We don't have an unlimited bandwidth or water supply we can throw out. So let's manage our data. So we have some company or some municipalities that, what do you like? Video, right? I could never have been a teenager in today's world. They would have, and we all know that, right? They would have seen so much stuff that I shouldn't be doing. And we do know, right? And there it is. But these guys were abusing our network. I like to say, and it's Brad's opinion, but unlimited is not unreasonable, right? We think your average is going to be 25 gig, and some student at home ran through 200 gig watching who knows what for 24 hours a day. And so with video, we do need to kind of do the same thing. Some guy watching an intersection in 4K high-def video, really? But when an incident happens, yeah, they want even more than that. So we had to have a discussion with them that, hey, you know, we estimate your usage was going to be 5 to 10 gig and you're using 3 terabits. We chat. And so we really struggled to find a solution. Found a vendor that was big in Europe, and they codex each side, right? Encode, decode, so they're able to compress the data. Took what was typically 100, 150 megs per second stream, and like 20 megs, so a factor of 5. And it's funny because the reason I like this use case is they're like, well, let's come in, you pay for a day, and we'll do a demo in your center, right? We'll put a camera in, show the table. You can have your camera, show the table. We'll see what's going on. It'll take us a day to bring in this stuff, and you can look at it for a week or so. Well, they came in, they're like, oh, plug in this machine, plug in this machine, connect the camera. Wow, that's pretty cool. Lunch break. Came back from lunch, they're like, let's go put it in an intersection. And so, you know, the afternoon was, we're going to deploy it in a test environment. They threw it out on the test environment. We won it. It was that quick. They just realized. And so one of the enhanced features of that I think is, I call it wicked cool stuff, but you're able in that video analytics solution to create what's called a geofence. And so the one I saw last week is, here's the freeway, here's the shoulder. Let's do a geofence of the shoulder, and when somebody pulls off the road, it triggers an alert, right? So now I say, hey, Joe pulled off the road, what's going on? Flat tire, car on fire, kid, 3-year-old kid, can't wait till the next rest stop, whatever it may be. But the ability to geofence these kind of, and that's exactly, you know, there's your answer. Is the smart tags, if it hit into a network that's not there, right? So it can be a non-coverage,
Right.
but then it gets off the mountain, and guess what? He's down in the city, going for a date and some drinks, or, you know, that's not good. So I like that. GPS, you know, huge. Back to your comment about public safety or even just an individual walking. I know what I was going to say. One of my customers in the previous world was a company called AMRG, Air Medical Resource Group. They had an office in Sandy, and we fought about it. Apparently, they won with their corporate headquarters is in Phoenix, but I think the number is $200. $200 you can buy a life flight insurance. And if I go on the backcountry very often, it's a no-brainer. I have buddies, you know, dad of my boys' friends, kidney stone. I got kidney stone, do not want that. Got lifeline, it's like $40,000 bill, right? So spots, you know, you can see, I mean, those things work perfectly, right? You just carry it around, boom. They know right where you are, they know you're in trouble because you push the button. You'll see people get saved within 3 to 5 hours.
Sorry, what's it called? Spots?
Spot, yeah, there's some of those personal locator devices. There are a lot of the sporting goods stores, Spot, I think is one thing.
Yeah, I was thinking kind of along the lines, if you've got a series of volunteers and they're looking for a lost child or something like that in the area
Yep.
that where the volunteers, their ability to find the child is going to be likely based upon how closely they can
Correct.
sit together so there's not gaps. And so then the whatever, the connected device would then communicate in some way
Mhm.
to ensure that there's an equivalent gap and move the group so as they move in a single direction.
Right.
They're able to do that and shift back. You know, I think that would be an interesting opportunity. I think about that same thing for firefighters. They're out on the field and they, you know, it's like they, you know, the radios may not work, or maybe other issues, or they don't know exactly where they are because they're used their bearings to call the fire and be able to find them. But I guess that would.
That's FirstNet. I mean, there's FirstNet. But for your comment is, I think you know, a clear motivation would be just a little shock charge.
Sure. Yeah, right.
Oh, I better get that. Right. There's a way to do some pain avoidance there, but this ability to actually do a grid search, to be able to say here's where we're mapped out at. Let's
Yeah.
make a product.
Because each device would have to be connected.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, and there's many use cases for that in and of itself. Is, you know,
Yeah.
I want to do some sort of analysis of what's going on wherever. I mean, any
Why
rancher, but farmers
Yeah.
use
Oh, we
GPS
could
to
use
plow
that
our fields.
advertising.
Yeah.
That's why their rows are pretty straight now. They literally can just sit in a cab and hang out. Their tractor almost ready to sell. How much time do we have left?
It's 1 o'clock right now, so.
Looky there. I'm here all week if you want. I'm happy. You can tell, I love these use case questions. That's just awesome. Back to water, I'm kind of curious because I got a guy who was using the leakage from the EMI from power cables to create power,
Mhm.
which is kind of an interesting concept, right? It's if
Yeah.
I have power, then I can use that EMI. So that was kind of cool where you could do that and then bring stuff back to where you had coverage.
Quite a ways to come back to it though.
Yeah. I mean, your comment is exactly, I don't know, maybe you can ask how to do that. Or
Yeah.
you can go buy a Colt to sell on my truck, sell on drone to the firefighters, we're seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Or it'll come up above and then literally, it's not just a drone looking at everything, it's a cell coverage drone where they can go up back and forth. We do a not funky, it's pretty cool. The reason I love this AirMed place is because we sold a phone and it had what's called push to talk and it operated like a walkie-talkie, but it also could detect significant change in elevation. So the whole theory there was helicopter goes down, change in elevation, give me the coordinates and I can find the ramp from a phone. So, but I don't know if we did any good or not today. Hopefully the food was good. I love this stuff. I mean, my wife she's like, it's hilarious. I mean, the funny part about this outage last week, I had to laugh. After 14 hours, they're like, oh, we need to look at this box at midnight to see if it's broken. At 5 o'clock, they're like, oh, we got to the box and it's broken, so we went ahead and worked on it, right? 10 minutes later, everything's coming up, but it took us all day to find the box.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a random box, actually. So, troubleshooting this stuff, my peers are like, I have no idea how we're talking on the phone right now. And the guys who are in the background on these networks, they're like, I don't even know, I can't even believe it works. Like so it appears very easy. The phone dial, that's why we draw a cloud over it, because it's such a mess. We just are like, cover it with a cloud and they'll never know how weird and stupid and crazy and unique it is. Any other questions, just so we round out? You're welcome to, I don't know if you did, but on the distribution list, you're welcome to throw my email out. I get calls from my reps all the time. They're like, sorry for calling. I'm like, my job. If you don't call me, I'm pretty lonely. Now I'm ready to get out and see people. I'm saying this is like the 9th time that I've been able to come out from a group since COVID, 3 years, so I'm still in single digits. Hey, thanks for coming. Super fun stuff coming. Like you're gonna see just crazy stuff. Incubators like this where you can kind of noodle around and come up with a product or a solution or just this is really where you come up with a better mousetrap. It's fun stuff. I really do. I'm excited around tech for a long time, and it's that hockey stick because now, unfortunately for you, the network's not there, but the network capacity 5G is going to get us to go do things that we've never been able to do. Cool. Thank you.